She was being sold as an Apache slave, but he chose to rescue her at any cost. The sun had barely risen over the dusty hills of the Apache village, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and orange. In the small cluster of homes made of wood and earth, life moved at a rhythm that had been unchanged for generations. Children laughed as they ran barefoot along the dirt paths, chasing each other with sticks and small wooden toys, while elders sat quietly outside their homes, sharing stories and advice in low, gentle voices. Smoke curled lazily from cooking fires, carrying the rich scent of roasted corn and herbs. Everything seemed calm, almost ordinary, but beneath the surface, a sense of unease was slowly growing, though no one yet understood why. In one of the homes, a young Apache woman moved quickly and quietly, performing her morning chores. Her hair, long and dark, was tied back to keep it out of her face, and her eyes, sharp and bright, seemed to notice everything around her. She was strong, independent, and had learned from a young age how to survive in the harsh landscape of her homeland. Today, like every other day, she carried water from the nearby stream, swept the floor, and helped prepare breakfast for her family. But as she worked, a shadow of worry crossed her face. Over the past few days, rumors had begun circulating in the village about strangers traveling through the region. Some said they were traders, others whispered darker stories. People said that these strangers were not like the visitors who occasionally came to trade goods. They were dangerous men who did not care for the lives of those they met. They were known to capture women and children, selling them far away to places no one could reach. Though the woman tried to ignore these stories, she could not shake the feeling that something bad was approaching. Her mother noticed the change in her daughter's expression and placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "You seem troubled, child," she said softly, her eyes filled with concern. "What weighs on your heart?" The young woman shook her head. "I do not know, mother," she admitted. "I feel as if danger is near. Something tells me that we are not as safe as we think." Her mother's face grew tense. "We must stay alert," she said. "Trust your instincts as our people always have, and remember, whatever comes, we face it together." The day continued, but the woman could not focus. She felt eyes on her, though when she looked around, she saw nothing unusual. Every sound made her jump slightly. The rustle of the leaves, the distant call of a hawk, even the soft murmurs of her siblings. It was a feeling that grew heavier with each passing hour, until finally, late in the morning, the dreaded sound came, the clip-clop of hooves approaching from the main path. The woman's heart sank. She peeked through the small wooden slats of the doorway and saw a group of men riding into the village. They were unlike the travelers and traders she had seen before. Their faces were hard, their expressions cruel. Each one wore rough clothing, and their eyes scanned the village as if measuring every person for weakness. In their hands, some carried ropes and chains. The woman's stomach twisted with fear, and she realized the stories she had heard were true. Panic spread through the village like wildfire. Mothers hurried to gather their children, and men grabbed their tools and weapons, ready to defend their homes. But the strangers were quick, organized, and ruthless. They moved through the village with precision, cutting off escape routes and surrounding the homes. The woman's family tried to stand their ground, but it was clear they were outnumbered. Before she could react, one of the men burst into her home. The woman froze for a moment, her mind racing for a way to protect herself. Her mother stepped forward, shielding her daughter, her face a mixture of fear and courage. "You will not take her," she shouted, but the man only sneered. Within seconds, he grabbed the woman by the arm, pulling her toward the center of the village. She struggled, but his grip was strong, and her strength alone was not enough to free herself. She looked back at her family, her eyes wide with terror, silently begging them to find a way to save her. Her mother tried to resist, but more men surrounded them, forcing her to let go. As they dragged her away, the woman noticed the faces of her neighbors. Some were crying, some were shouting, and some had gone silent, paralyzed by fear. She realized the full extent of the danger. The men were here for more than just her. They wanted to take whoever they could, and no one could stop them. The villagers were helpless against the stranger's power. The woman's mind raced as she was pulled through the dirt paths, past the familiar homes that now seemed like a distant memory. She thought of her childhood, the moments of laughter by the stream, the quiet evenings around the fire, the love of her family and community. All of it felt like it was slipping away, and with each step, the reality of what was happening became harder to bear. She tried to remain calm, telling herself that she had faced difficult situations before, that she had survived challenges others might not have. She looked for any opportunity to escape, any weakness in her captors, but the men were vigilant. They exchanged no words with her, treating her not as a person, but as a possession to be moved and controlled. Hours passed, and the sun climbed high in the sky. The men finally brought her to a small, dusty clearing on the edge of the village. Here, more people were gathered, other captives, some of whom she recognized. There were children, elderly people, and women from neighboring families. The sight made her stomach churn with despair. She realized that her capture was part of a larger plan, a cruel system she could not understand or fight against alone. The woman's fear was overwhelming, but she forced herself to breathe, to think. She remembered the lessons her elders had taught her. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the strength to act despite it. She kept her head high, even as the men bound her hands and feet with rough ropes, making her movement nearly impossible. She scanned the crowd for familiar faces, hoping for any sign of help, but everyone looked equally trapped and hopeless. As the day wore on, she began to understand the seriousness of her situation. She would soon be sold to a distant place, separated from her home and family forever. The thought was unbearable, but a small spark of determination burned inside her. She would not give up. She would survive. She would find a way to be free, no matter the cost. The men eventually led her to a small cart, where other captives were already placed. She was shoved inside, the ropes biting into her skin, but she held herself upright, refusing to show complete defeat. As the cart began to move, she glanced back at the village one last time. The homes, the smoke, the hills, all of it seemed to blur together, becoming a memory she feared might never return. But in that moment of despair, a thought crossed her mind, one that gave her a tiny glimmer of hope. She had heard stories of people who had intervened in situations like this, strangers with courage and determination, who refused to let injustice prevail. She did not know if anyone would come, but she held onto the belief that perhaps, somehow, she might not be entirely alone. As the cart rattled along the dusty path, carrying her away from everything familiar, the woman made a silent promise to herself. She would survive, she would find a way back, and she would not let fear control her. Even in the darkest moments, a part of her remained unbroken. And somewhere along the horizon, a new chapter of her life was beginning, one filled with danger, courage, and the possibility of rescue she had yet to see. The sun continued to rise, casting long shadows across the land. Birds circled above, seemingly unaware of the human struggles below. The woman sat quietly in the cart, her hands bound, her heart pounding, and her mind filled with thoughts of home and family. She did not know what awaited her, but she knew one thing for certain. She would face it with every ounce of strength she possessed. And as the cart disappeared over the hill, the village behind her seemed to grow smaller, but her resolve only grew stronger. She was not just a victim of circumstance. She was a young woman with courage, intelligence, and a fierce will to survive. Somewhere out there, someone might see the injustice and act. Until then, she would hold on to hope, even in the face of overwhelming odds. The journey had begun, and though she did not yet know the full extent of the danger, she was ready to meet it head-on. The sun climbed higher, The wind whispered through the hills, and the wheels of the cart carried her toward an uncertain future, a future that would test every part of her, but also reveal her strength and resilience in ways she could not yet imagine. The morning sun had barely warmed the valley when a man rode along the dusty trail that led near the Apache village. His horse moved steadily, its hooves kicking up small clouds of dirt with every step. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man, with eyes sharp and alert, scanning the horizon as if he could see danger before it arrived. His face was weathered from years spent outdoors, traveling, working, and observing the land, but there was a calm strength about him, a quiet confidence that suggested he had faced challenges before and survived. He was not from the village, nor did he belong to the Apache people, but he respected them. He knew their customs, their courage, and their love for the land. Over the years, he had learned to navigate their world carefully, understanding the importance of trust, patience, and timing. On this day, however, he was not here for trade, work, or friendship. He was here because of a story he had heard, a rumor about a woman in danger, someone being taken against her will, someone who needed help. The man had followed the trail for hours, guided by the whispers of travelers and the signs left on the land. Broken branches, disturbed soil, and the distant sound of hooves had led him to the edge of the village. When he arrived, he stayed hidden among the trees, watching silently. His trained eyes immediately noticed the commotion. Villagers running, mothers clutching their children, men grabbing whatever they could to defend themselves. And in the center of it all, a group of strangers, men with cruel expressions and ropes in hand, taking captives one by one. He saw her first, the young Apache woman who had been captured and forced toward the center of the village. She struggled against the ropes, her face a mix of fear, determination, and disbelief. The man's heart clenched. He knew in that instant that he could not leave her to the mercy of those cruel men. He had seen injustice before, and he knew he had to act, no matter the risk. The first instinct was caution. He could not rush in blindly, for there were too many captors, and one wrong move could endanger both him and the woman. Instead, he began to observe their movements carefully, noting the patterns in which the men moved, the way they positioned themselves, and the moments when they appeared distracted. He could tell they were experienced, but even the most careful people had weaknesses. All he had to do was find one and act decisively. Hours passed, and the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting sharp shadows across the village. From his hiding spot, the man watched as the captives were loaded into a small cart, preparing for transport. The woman sat among them, her hands bound, but her posture still proud. She refused to look completely defeated, and in that moment, he admired her courage. It was clear she was not someone who would give up easily, and that made him even more determined to save her. As the cart began to move, rattling along the dirt path, the man mounted his horse and followed from a safe distance. He stayed behind the trees and hills, careful not to reveal his presence too early. Every time the cart slowed, he observed the captors, studying their movements, their weaknesses, and the terrain around them. He knew that the journey ahead would be dangerous. The captors were armed and ruthless, and the woman was only a small part of a larger plan. But he also knew that courage and careful planning could overcome even the greatest obstacles. The woman's eyes met his from across the distance, though she did not know who he was. Something in her gaze suggested she sensed he was different from the men who had taken her. There was hope there, fragile but unmistakable. He offered her a small, reassuring nod, signaling silently that she was not completely alone. The gesture was brief, almost imperceptible, but it was enough to give her a spark of courage. Throughout the morning, the man followed the cart, using every skill he had learned from years of experience. He moved through the hills, over streams, and along hidden trails, always staying close enough to intervene, but far enough to avoid detection. He made mental notes of potential escape routes, places to hide, and natural obstacles that could slow the captors down. Every detail mattered because one mistake could cost the woman her freedom or even her life. By midday, the cart had entered a narrow canyon, surrounded by steep rocks and dense brush. The captors had slowed their pace, thinking the difficult terrain would prevent anyone from following. The man saw an opportunity. He could use the canyon's natural cover to approach the cart and create a distraction, something that would allow the woman a chance to act. He slowed his horse, listening to the sounds of the wind through the rocks and the creaking of the cart wheels. Every second was critical. He began to formulate a plan. It would require courage, timing, and precise action. He could not afford to hesitate. First, he would need to scare the horses pulling the cart, causing a moment of confusion among the captors. Then he could intervene directly, freeing the woman from her bonds while the captors were distracted. It was risky, far riskier than simply following and hoping for another opportunity. But he knew this was his only chance. Hesitation could mean disaster for her. As he prepared, he also thought of the woman's perspective. She was alone, bound, and surrounded by danger. She had already survived the first stage of this nightmare, but the next moments would be even more critical. He needed to give her every chance to stay calm and focused, even without speaking a word. The mere presence of someone willing to risk everything for her could make the difference between despair and determination. The man waited for the perfect moment. When the cart reached the narrowest part of the canyon, where the rocks on either side formed a natural choke point, he acted. He galloped along a hidden path parallel to the cart, raising a branch to create a loud, sudden noise. The horses pulling the cart reared back, startled by the unexpected sound, and the captors struggled to regain control. In that brief window of chaos, the man leapt from his horse, landing silently behind a large boulder, close enough to the cart to intervene. The woman's eyes widened as she saw a figure appear seemingly from nowhere. Though her hands were still bound, she recognized a glimmer of hope. The man's calm, determined gaze told her he was here to help, and for the first time since her capture, she felt a spark of courage. She adjusted her posture, preparing herself to act when the moment came. The captors shouted and tried to regain control of the frightened horses. In that moment, the man made his move. He rushed forward, grabbing one of the ropes and cutting it swiftly with a small knife he carried. The woman's hands were free in an instant, and she moved quickly, slipping out from the cart with agility and determination. Together, they navigated the chaos, ducking behind rocks and staying low to avoid detection. Though the captors quickly realized what had happened and began to chase them, the man had anticipated this. He had memorized the terrain, noting every possible hiding place and escape route. They ran together through narrow paths, over uneven rocks, and along hidden trails, moving as quickly and quietly as possible. Every step was filled with tension, but also a growing sense of relief. For the first time since her capture, the woman felt a glimmer of freedom. As they paused behind a large boulder to catch their breath, the woman looked at the man. Her eyes were wide with gratitude and disbelief. Who are you?" she asked, her voice shaking slightly from both fear and relief. The man shook his head with a small smile, not wanting to distract her with explanations. "No time for that now," he said quietly. "We need to keep moving. They will not give up easily." She nodded, understanding that survival came first. Together, they continued, moving with a careful rhythm, fast enough to stay ahead of the captors but cautious enough not to make noise or draw attention. The sun beat down on them, sweat stinging their eyes, but neither paused. Every second mattered. Hours passed and the canyon began to widen, offering more room for maneuvering. The man led the woman to a hidden path that would eventually take them far from the canyon and out of immediate danger. Along the way, they communicated with gestures and whispered words, each learning to trust the other completely. She discovered that he was strong, intelligent, and determined. He discovered that she was brave, quick-witted, and unyielding. Together, they formed a silent partnership, united by a shared goal: survival. As evening approached, the sun dipping low behind the hills, they found a small grove to rest. Hidden from view, they took a moment to recover, sharing water and food they had carried. The woman's hands bore small scrapes from the ropes and rocks, but her spirit remained unbroken. The man tended to her injuries with care, his actions gentle and respectful, further strengthening the trust between them. In that quiet moment, away from the chaos and danger, the woman realized something important. She was not alone. Someone had risked everything to save her, and that knowledge gave her a sense of hope she had not felt since her capture. She looked at him, gratitude shining in her eyes, and silently promised herself that she would survive, not just for her own sake, but for the man who had shown such courage. The night fell, and the stars appeared in the clear sky above. The canyon grew quiet, and for the first time in many hours they allowed themselves to rest, knowing the journey ahead was far from over. The man kept watch, alert for any sign of the captors, while the woman reflected on the day's events. She understood now that freedom was not something easily given. It was something fought for, often at great personal risk. And in that fight, she had found an unexpected ally. As they slept, side by side but keeping a careful distance, the bond between them began to grow, not yet spoken in words, but felt in mutual respect, trust, and understanding. The night was filled with quiet determination, a shared promise to survive, and a hope that they could outwit those who sought to harm them. And so, as the first light of dawn approached, the journey of rescue, trust, and courage continued. The woman, once a captive, now walked beside someone who had risked everything to save her. Though danger still lingered, she felt, for the first time, that she might actually make it through, and that someone believed in her enough to fight for her life. The morning air was crisp and cool as the woman and her rescuer continued their journey through the hills and forests beyond the canyon. The events of the previous day weighed heavily on both of them, but there was no time to rest. Danger still lurked nearby, and the captors were likely pursuing them with relentless determination. Every sound, the snap of a twig, the rustle of leaves, or the distant call of a hawk, was a reminder that they had to remain alert. The man led the way, moving silently and deliberately. His years of experience traveling through rough terrain had taught him to read the land like a map. He knew which paths were safe, where the water sources were, and how to avoid leaving signs that could give away their location. The woman followed closely, careful to match his pace, her eyes constantly scanning the surroundings. Her hands still bore the marks of her earlier captivity, but her spirit was strong, and her determination to survive burned brighter with every step. As they moved through a narrow valley, the man paused and crouched behind a large boulder. He gestured for the woman to do the same. From this vantage point, they could see smoke rising in the distance, a signal that the captors were not far behind. The woman's heart pounded in her chest. The fear that had gripped her during her capture returned in full force, but this time it was tempered by a growing sense of hope. She was not alone, and that made all the difference. The man spoke in a low, calm voice, careful not to startle her. "We need to move quickly but quietly. They may be tracking us, and we cannot afford to make any mistakes." He scanned the terrain ahead, identifying a narrow, winding path that would give them cover. "If we follow this path, we can stay hidden and possibly put some distance between us and them." The woman nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. She trusted him completely, though she still did not know his name. His presence was reassuring, and she felt a small measure of strength knowing that someone else was fighting for her freedom. Together, they slipped along the hidden path, keeping low and silent, moving as shadows among the rocks and trees. Hours passed as they navigated the rough terrain. They had to cross a shallow stream, climb over rocky hills, and move through dense thickets. Each obstacle was a test of endurance, patience, and careful planning. The woman discovered that she could rely on her instincts and the skills she had learned from her people. She could move quietly, find secure footing on slippery rocks, and remain calm under pressure. Her rescuer noticed this, silently acknowledging her courage and resilience. As midday approached, they stopped for a brief rest in a small clearing surrounded by tall pine trees. The man offered her some water, which she drank eagerly, grateful for the small comfort. He inspected her hands, noting the abrasions from ropes and rocks, and gently tended to the cuts with a cloth he carried. "We cannot stay long," he reminded her softly. "If they catch up to us here, we will have no chance." The woman nodded, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you for saving me," she whispered. "I do not know what would have happened if you had not come." The man shook his head, his expression serious. "No thanks yet, we are not safe. But I will do everything I can to make sure you are free." His words were simple, but they carried a weight of determination and promise that gave her hope. They continued their journey, moving cautiously through the forest. The sounds of nature were constant, the chirping of birds, the rustle of small animals, the wind whispering through the trees. Yet beneath these ordinary sounds there was always the tension of pursuit. The woman's senses were heightened, every crack of a branch or distant shout making her heart race. She learned to rely on the man's experience and judgment, following his lead without hesitation. As the afternoon sun climbed higher, they encountered their first real obstacle, a wide, shallow river that blocked their path. The current was swift, and the rocks along the bank were slippery and uneven. The woman hesitated, unsure how they could cross safely without attracting attention. The man examined the river carefully, searching for a spot where the water was calmer and the crossing could be made quickly. "There," he said, pointing to a narrow section where the current was slower and the rocks formed a natural bridge. "We can cross here, but we must be careful. One wrong step and we could be swept away." The woman took a deep breath and followed him, placing her feet carefully on the wet stones. The water rushed past them, cold and relentless, but they moved steadily. The man offered his hand whenever she needed support, and she relied on his guidance, trusting him completely. Step by step, they made their way across, hearts pounding but determined to reach the other side. Once across, they paused briefly on the riverbank, catching their breath and checking their surroundings. They were far from safe, but the small victory gave them a renewed sense of confidence. The woman looked at the man, admiration in her eyes. "I could not have done this alone," she said softly. "You would have found a way," he replied. "But together we are stronger. Remember that." Their journey continued through the afternoon, the terrain growing more challenging with every mile. They climbed steep hills, navigated dense forests, and avoided open areas where they could be easily seen. The woman began to notice a pattern in their movements, how the man used shadows, natural cover, and elevation to their advantage. She realized that he was not only skilled but also patient, always thinking several steps ahead to keep them safe. As evening approached, the sky turning shades of orange and purple, they reached a small, secluded cave hidden among the hills. The man had spotted it earlier and knew it would provide temporary shelter for the night. Inside, they lit a small fire, careful to keep it contained and low so as not to draw attention. The warmth was a relief after the long day, and the woman finally allowed herself a moment to relax. Sitting near the fire, she reflected on the events that had brought her here. Her capture had been terrifying, but her escape had shown her that courage and determination could prevail even in the darkest moments. She felt a growing respect and gratitude for the man who had risked everything to save her. He, in turn, observed her quietly, noting her bravery, intelligence, and resilience. He understood that freedom was not simply given. It had to be earned through courage, trust, and careful planning. The night grew darker, and the sounds of the forest filled the cave. The woman could hear owls calling, the rustle of small animals, and the distant howl of a wolf. She felt a mix of fear and fascination, realizing that even in this wild, dangerous land, there was beauty and life. The man kept watch, alert for any sign of the captors, while the woman rested, her mind still alert but her body able to recover for the challenges ahead. Before sleep overtook them, the man spoke quietly. "Tomorrow, we will continue. We need to put more distance between us and them and find a safer place where you can recover fully." The woman nodded, understanding the seriousness of his words. "I trust you," she said simply. "That trust will keep us alive," he replied. "Remember, no matter how difficult it gets, we must keep moving. We cannot let fear control us." The night passed slowly, each moment filled with tension and vigilance. When dawn finally arrived, they were ready to continue. The woman felt a renewed sense of determination, knowing that each step they took brought her closer to freedom. The man, calm and focused, led the way, always watching, always planning, always ready to face whatever danger might come. The journey ahead would be long and filled with obstacles. They would have to navigate unfamiliar territory, avoid pursuit, and stay strong despite exhaustion. But for the first time since her capture, the woman felt hope. She was no longer alone, and together they would face whatever challenges lay ahead. Step by step, mile by mile, they moved forward, two determined souls bound by a shared goal, united by courage, trust, and the belief that freedom was worth every risk. And though the danger was far from over, they had already proven that bravery and determination could overcome even the darkest circumstances. The morning sun broke through the mist that clung to the hills, casting long shadows across the rugged terrain. The woman and her rescuer moved carefully through the dense forest, the previous night's rest having given them some strength, but not enough to shake off the exhaustion of the journey so far. Every sound, twigs snapping, leaves rustling, birds calling, made them pause and listen. Danger was never far behind, and they both knew that the captors would not give up easily. The man led the way, his eyes sharp and alert, scanning every movement and shadow. His instincts told him that they were getting close to a more open area where the captors might attempt to corner them. He slowed his pace slightly, signaling the woman to do the same. "We have to be cautious," he whispered. "This next section is dangerous. If they catch us here, we might not get another chance." The woman's heart raced, but she followed him without hesitation. Her trust in him had grown steadily since the moment he had rescued her from the cart. She realized that her survival depended on their partnership, and that trust gave her a quiet courage she hadn't felt before. She kept her movements small and deliberate, staying close to him and listening to every instruction. As they emerged from the forest, they found themselves in a wide, open meadow. The grass swayed gently in the wind, but the openness made them vulnerable. The man's eyes narrowed. He knew this was likely a trap. The captors would have expected them to take the safest path through the forest, and now they might be waiting for them in the open. He led the woman to a small rise in the ground, providing a slight cover. From there, they could see the path ahead and any potential threats. Sure enough, in the distance, he spotted figures moving through the trees. The captors had found their trail and were closing in, their expressions hard and determined. The woman's stomach tightened with fear, but the man's calm presence reassured her. "We have to act quickly," he said, his voice steady. "We cannot outrun them in the open. We need a plan." He scanned the area and noticed a narrow creek cutting across the meadow, its banks lined with thick bushes. "If we reach the creek," he explained, "we can use the brush for cover and force them into a bottleneck. It will give us an advantage." The woman nodded, understanding. Together, they moved cautiously, keeping low and using the terrain to their advantage. Every step was calculated, every sound carefully controlled. Despite the fear and exhaustion, they felt a sense of determination growing between them, a silent promise that neither would give up. As they reached the creek, The captors were close enough to hear their movements. One of the men shouted, and the sound echoed across the meadow. The woman froze, her heart pounding, but the man placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "Stay calm," he whispered. "Trust me." He quickly tied a few small branches together and used them to create a simple, temporary barrier across the narrowest point of the creek. When the captors arrived, they would be forced to slow down, giving the woman and her rescuer the chance to gain an upper hand. The captors appeared over the rise, their faces twisted in anger and frustration. They had been confident in their pursuit, but the sudden obstacles and clever tactics of the man threw them off balance. One shouted orders, but the others hesitated, unsure how to proceed. The woman realized the moment of opportunity had arrived. "Now," the man said, and they moved quickly. He grabbed a large branch and swung it at the nearest captor, knocking him off balance. The woman followed his lead, using her strength and agility to push past the remaining captors and create distance between them. The sudden resistance caught the men off guard, and they stumbled, giving the pair a critical advantage. The chase continued, but the man's planning and knowledge of the terrain allowed them to stay ahead. They ducked behind rocks, moved through dense undergrowth, and used every trick they knew to avoid capture. The woman was exhausted, but her fear had been replaced by adrenaline and determination. She discovered a strength within herself that she had not known existed, an ability to act quickly, think clearly, and stay calm under pressure. At one point, they found themselves on a steep hillside, the ground loose and treacherous. The captors were gaining, their shouts growing louder. The man turned to the woman. "Hold on to me," he said. "We have to climb carefully, but this will give us higher ground." She gripped his hand tightly, trusting his guidance completely. Step by step, they climbed the hillside, using rocks and tree roots to support themselves. Behind them, the captors struggled to follow, slowed by the difficult terrain. For the first time, the woman felt a sense of hope. They were not completely free, but they had created a momentary advantage that could save their lives. Reaching the top of the hill, they paused to catch their breath. From this vantage point, they could see the valley below, the meadow they had just crossed, and the forest beyond. The captors were still pursuing them, but the distance and difficult terrain had slowed them. The woman's chest heaved as she processed the events of the day. She had survived capture, a dangerous journey, and now a direct confrontation. And through it all, she had learned to trust in herself and in the man who had risked everything to save her. The man looked at her with a mixture of admiration and concern. "You've been incredible," he said quietly. "Your courage and quick thinking made all the difference, but we are not safe yet. We need to find a secure place to rest and plan our next move." The woman nodded, feeling a growing sense of gratitude and respect for him. She realized that her survival was not just about physical strength. It was about trust, strategy, and the willingness to act despite fear. The man had shown her all of these qualities, and in doing so, had given her the chance to reclaim her freedom. They moved carefully down the hillside and into the forest beyond, where the trees provided cover and protection. The sounds of the captors' pursuit grew fainter as they put distance between themselves and the open meadow. The woman's muscles ached, her hands were sore, but her spirit remained strong. She knew that the journey ahead would be difficult, but she also knew that they could face it together. As evening approached, they found a hidden grove with a small stream. The man quickly assessed the area, ensuring it was safe, before allowing the woman to rest. They drank water from the stream and shared a simple meal they had carried, replenishing their energy for the challenges ahead. Sitting by the water, the woman reflected on the events of the day. The danger, the fear, and the uncertainty had been overwhelming, but she also recognized the moments of courage and strength, both in herself and in the man who had saved her. She felt a deep sense of gratitude, knowing that without him she would have been lost. The man noticed her thoughtful expression. "We need to rest now," he said gently. "Tomorrow we continue." We have to put even more distance between us and them and find a safe place where you can recover fully." The woman nodded, feeling a renewed sense of determination. "I trust you," she said softly. "That trust will keep us alive," he replied. "Remember, no matter how difficult it gets, we must keep moving. We cannot let fear control us." The night grew quiet around them, filled with the sounds of the forest, the rustle of leaves, the calls of nocturnal animals, and the gentle flow of the stream. They kept a watchful eye on the surroundings, taking turns resting and remaining alert for any signs of danger. The woman felt a sense of calm, knowing that they had survived another day and that they were closer to safety than before. As she lay down to rest, she thought about the journey so far. She had been captured, forced into a terrifying situation, and yet here she was, alive, free, and moving forward with someone who had risked everything to help her. She realized that freedom was not simply given. It had to be earned through courage, trust, and determination. And she was learning, step by step, how to fight for it. The man kept watch, his eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of pursuit. He understood the stakes. They were not yet safe, and one misstep could change everything. But he also recognized the woman's strength and resilience. She was no longer just a passive victim. She was an active participant in her own survival, learning to rely on her instincts and abilities. Together, they formed a partnership built on trust, courage, and a shared goal: freedom. The night passed slowly, but they emerged from it ready to continue their journey. The woman's spirit was stronger than ever, her trust in the man unwavering. And as dawn approached, they prepared to move once more, knowing that the final challenges were still ahead, but confident in their ability to face them together. Step by step, mile by mile, they moved forward, united in purpose and strengthened by the trials they had already endured. The danger was far from over, but their courage, determination, and trust in each other had carried them this far, and would continue to carry them toward the freedom they both sought. The first light of dawn crept over the hills, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and gold. The woman and her rescuer stirred from their brief rest in the secluded grove, the cool morning air filled with the sounds of the forest waking. Birds called to each other, and a gentle breeze rustled through the leaves. Despite the relative calm, both knew that danger had not disappeared. The captors were still out there, relentless and determined. The man spoke first, his voice quiet but firm. "We must move now. We need to reach a safe area before they catch up. Every step counts." The woman nodded, her muscles stiff from the long days of travel but her resolve unshaken. She had faced fear, exhaustion, and despair, yet she continued, driven by a newfound courage and the determination to reclaim her freedom. Together, they set off through the forest, using every skill and instinct they had honed over the past days. They moved carefully, sticking to hidden paths and using natural cover whenever possible. The man scanned the surroundings constantly, alert to any sign of pursuit. The woman followed closely, her eyes sharp, ready to react at a moment's notice. They communicated through gestures and brief whispers, conserving their strength and avoiding unnecessary noise. Hours passed as they navigated the dense forest, climbed steep hills, and crossed small streams. Each obstacle tested their endurance and determination. The woman's hands bore new scrapes from clinging to rocks and branches, and her feet ached from the rough terrain. Yet she pressed on, encouraged by the man's calm presence and unwavering focus. She realized that survival required more than strength. It required patience, trust, and quick thinking. By midday, they reached a small clearing where the sunlight broke through the trees. From this vantage point, the man could see the surrounding area more clearly. He paused, crouching behind a fallen tree trunk, and signaled the woman to do the same. "There," he whispered, pointing toward a ridge in the distance. "If we can reach that ridge, we can find a safe path that will take us away from them. But we need to be careful. The captors may have anticipated our moves." The woman's heart pounded with both fear and hope. She understood the stakes. They could not afford any mistakes. Together, they moved cautiously, keeping low and using the uneven terrain for cover. Every movement was deliberate, every sound controlled. They had learned from their previous encounters that patience and strategy could make the difference between freedom and capture. As they approached the ridge, they spotted movement in the distance. A group of men, their faces twisted in anger and determination, were making their way through the forest. The captors had tracked them, and a final confrontation was inevitable. The woman felt a surge of fear, but the man's calm and confident demeanor reminded her that they had the skills and determination to face the danger ahead. He turned to her, his eyes meeting hers. "Stay close," he said quietly. "We can outsmart them, but we must work together. Remember everything we have practiced. Stay calm, move carefully, and trust me." The woman nodded, taking a deep breath to steady herself. She felt a mixture of fear and courage, knowing that this was the final test. The man led the way, using the terrain to their advantage. They moved through narrow paths, behind rocks, and along the edge of a steep hill, staying just out of sight of the pursuing captors. Suddenly, one of the captors spotted movement ahead and shouted a warning. The man reacted immediately, signaling the woman to drop low. Using quick thinking and knowledge of the terrain, he led her toward a small cluster of dense bushes that offered temporary cover. The captors approached, scanning the area, but were momentarily confused by the clever maneuver. Seizing the opportunity, the man devised a plan to turn the situation in their favor. He picked up a few loose branches and created a small diversion, throwing them to the side to startle the captors' horses and draw attention away from their hiding spot. The sudden movement caused confusion, giving the woman and her rescuer a precious moment to move forward. They ran as quietly and swiftly as possible, weaving through the trees and over the rocks. The woman's heart raced, but her fear had been replaced by determination. She could see the ridge ahead, their path to safety. Each step brought them closer to freedom, and the thought of finally escaping filled her with energy she didn't know she had. As they reached the ridge, the captors realized they were being outmaneuvered. Some shouted in frustration, while others tried to pursue, but the difficult terrain slowed them down. The man and the woman moved quickly, taking advantage of every natural obstacle to maintain their lead. The ridge provided a clear vantage point, allowing them to spot any approaching danger and adjust their path accordingly. They descended carefully on the other side of the ridge, following a hidden trail that the man had noticed earlier. The forest grew thicker, and the path became more challenging, but it offered safety and concealment. The woman relied on the man's guidance, learning to trust his instincts completely. Together, they moved as a team, each step bringing them further from danger and closer to freedom. By late afternoon, they reached a small, secluded valley with a stream running through it. The area was surrounded by hills and thick trees, making it an ideal place to rest and recover. The man led the woman to a safe spot near the water, allowing her to drink and wash the dirt and sweat from her face. She felt a deep sense of relief, knowing that they had managed to evade the captors once again. Sitting by the stream, the woman finally allowed herself a moment to breathe. She reflected on the journey, the fear, the struggle, and the moments of courage that had brought her to this point. She realized that she had grown stronger through every challenge, discovering resilience and determination she had never known. The man watched her quietly, noting the strength and courage she had shown. "You've come a long way," he said softly, "but the journey is not over. We need to find a permanent safe place where you can be free without fear." The woman nodded, understanding that freedom was not simply escaping the captors. It was finding a place where she could live safely, with her dignity intact. "I trust you," she said, her voice filled with quiet strength. "That trust will keep you safe," he replied. "And together, we will make sure nothing can take it away from you." As the sun began to set, they prepared to rest for the night. They made a small camp near the stream, using natural cover to stay hidden. The woman tended to her sore muscles and scraped hands, while the man kept watch, alert for any signs of pursuit. The night passed slowly but peacefully, and for the first time in days, the woman felt a sense of security. The next morning, they resumed their journey, moving through the forest with renewed energy. The man led the way, carefully choosing paths that would avoid contact with the captors and provide the safest route to freedom. The woman followed closely, her trust in him unwavering. She had learned to rely on her instincts, her strength, and the guidance of her rescuer. After several days of careful travel, they finally reached a small settlement far from the path of the captors. The man had spoken to trusted people along the way, arranging a safe place for the woman to stay. When they arrived, she was greeted with kindness, food, and shelter, things she had not experienced since her capture. The relief she felt was overwhelming. She was finally free. She turned to the man, gratitude shining in her eyes. "You saved my life," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I do not know how to thank you enough." The man smiled gently. "You survived because you were brave and determined. I only helped guide you. But seeing you safe is all the thanks I need." The woman realized that her life had been changed forever. She had faced unimaginable danger, but through courage, trust, and the willingness of one person to act selflessly, she had found her freedom. She understood now that hope and determination could overcome even the darkest circumstances. Over the next days, she recovered her strength and began to rebuild her life. She reconnected with her community, sharing her story and the lessons she had learned about courage, resilience, and the importance of trust. The man remained nearby for a time, ensuring that she was truly safe before quietly returning to his own life, content in the knowledge that he had made a difference. The woman's life was no longer the same, but it was richer for the experience. She had discovered her own strength, the value of trust, and the power of hope. And she knew that she would never forget the man who had risked everything to save her, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, courage and compassion could prevail. As the sun set over the hills, casting golden light across the valley, the woman stood near the stream, feeling the warmth on her face. She thought of the journey, the dangers she had faced, and the freedom she had earned. She felt a deep sense of gratitude and hope, knowing that she could face whatever challenges lay ahead with strength, courage, and the memory of the man who had fought for her life. She had been captured, forced into a terrifying situation, and faced incredible danger, but she had survived. She had been tested, pushed to her limits, and emerged stronger and wiser. And above all, she had learned that freedom and safety were worth every risk, every step, and every moment of courage. The hills, the trees, and the flowing stream were no longer just part of the landscape. They were symbols of her journey, her struggle, and her triumph. And as she looked toward the horizon, she knew that her life, though forever changed, was now her own. A life filled with hope, strength, and the promise of a future free from fear.